Hey, what's going on, everybody? Back with another how-to. Today we're going to be doing the front and rear brakes on this 2009 Nissan Pathfinder. Now this should fall in line with any third-gen Pathfinder, which is 2005 to 2012. So let's get into it now. Alright guys, so we are at the front here. First thing we're going to do, of course, is remove the wheel. Now the lug nuts are a 21 mil. I just have a 21 mil on the impact. And I'm going to fire all 6 of these right out. Alright, so as you see, we have the wheel off. Now, you come in here, you can see how horrible these pads and rotors are. On the other side it was metal on metal. I just did the other side, so we're on to the passenger side here. Now before we get started, one thing I'm going to suggest is if you have the whole front end up in the air, jacked up, so in my case I have the jack positioned in the front jack point, I have jack stands in the front, so I'm supporting it in both ways. It is on the jack stands, but I also have the jack tightened in place just for extra leverage and support. So if you have both front wheels in the air, what it allows you to do is turn the wheel and it'll give you better access to the bolts we need to access to do the job. Now it's probably going to lock up on you. I'm going to try to do it manually here. Yeah, it locked, but all I want to do is go turn the steering wheel the rest of the way with the key to the on position. We're going to pull this all the way turned to that side so we can have access in here to our bolts to disassemble everything. Alright, so we have the wheel fully turned. Now we have full access here to our bolts we need to get to in order to disassemble this and to make it easy as possible on ourselves. So I'm just going to take an impact here. We're going to start with our caliper bolts. The caliper bolts are a 14 mil. So I have a 14 mil here on impact. I'm going to fire these both right out. Alright, so 14 mil. Use a ratchet, wrench, impact, whatever tool you choose, but like I said, turning it this way will give you best access, especially if you're using an impact or something like that. So now that we have both of those 14 mils out, caliper should be free. Should be able to rock it right off. And what I'm going to do is just put it up and over here right now, out of our work way. Try to avoid hitting that wire here as much as I can, but I'm just going to leave it resting right there for right now. And now, as you can see, we have access to our pads. Now, should have 2 of these retainer pins here. Should be one at the top, one here at the bottom. No big deal. I got some new ones anyway since the other one is missing, but yeah, you can see how bad these pads are. I mean, they're beyond bad. So, should be able to come in here and press them out. If you're having trouble, you can always take a pry bar in here and just push them out lightly. Not a big deal. So pads are out. Now the only thing left here is to remove our 2 19 mil bolts, and that is what's retaining the caliper bracket to the knuckle itself. So I'm just going to take a 19 mil here on an impact. So 19 mil on an impact. Got that one. Now you don't want to fire these all the way out, at least not the top one, because you want it to hold it in place. Once the bolts come out, the caliper bracket is free and will fall. So I'm just going to do a light hit. Okay, I got that loose. Now I'm going to get this bottom one out. Alright, and if you can see, that's pretty much free. So what I'm going to do now is hold it. I'll fire that out. And there we have it. The caliper bracket is fully off. Like I said, you just don't want it to fall and hit the ground. So it's an easy way to get it off. Just back the top one out and then hold it while you're pulling the rest of the bolt out. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and get this rotor off. But before I do that, I want to use this old rotor as a workbench here. And we're going to use that to retract our caliper pistons here for the new pad. So of course, these pistons and the caliper need to be retracted in order to fit the new thicker pads. So the correct tool here I would suggest using is a pad separator. And what this would do is it falls in here and almost acts like a ratchet. And because this is a dual piston setup, you could crank this like a ratchet and it'll slowly press up against this and retract the pistons back. This is the correct tool. Unfortunately, mine broke, so I went to use it on the other side and it's completely broke. I don't know what's wrong with it. I can't get this to spin off, and the one side doesn't lock anymore. So I don't know what happened the last time I used this thing, but apparently I did something or let it fall or something, because it doesn't work anymore. So I'm assuming most people probably don't have that readily available, and in a way it's a good thing that broke, because I can show you another way to get this done accurately and successfully to get these pistons retracted. Now what you're going to want to do is grab one of the old pads. I mean, you might have some very uneven pads like this one here. I mean, this thing, geez, I don't know how he was doing this. It's crazy. But this is the most even pad I have. So what I'm going to do is grab an even pad, and what we're going to do is the double C-clamp method. Now, I showed you the right tool to use, so don't come in my comments and be like, oh my god, your head gasket's going to fail because you're using 2 C-clamps and not the correct tool. So as long as they're going in even, that's all that matters, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm going to set this up with dual C-clamps, and then I'll show you what we got going on. Alright guys, so here is our retraction setup. These are 6-inch C-clamps. I got one evenly positioned on the old pad on both pistons, and as you can see, they're here set up. So you're going to have to do these together at the same time. Essentially, you're going to let this, you know, creep one a little bit, then creep the next. What I was doing on the other side, which made it a lot easier, and it's going to be kind of hard for me to record and show you this at the same time. Let me see if I can do it. There we go. I held it like this to give me some stability. I would turn this and then come over here and then turn the other one. All right, so I'm just going to do that, you know, just barely inch my way off of both of them the whole time, and you'll see them slowly starting to retract. And just make sure you periodically check the pad, make sure it still looks even and, you know, perfectly horizontal with the pistons and the caliper itself, and that way you know you're going in even, and both of these are going to be about exactly the same, if not exactly the same position. If they're like a millimeter apart, the world isn't going to end, I promise. They'll situate themselves once some brake fluid comes in, the pads are in and the brake pedal is depressed. So we're going to go ahead and inch these along, and then we'll get both of these retracted. Alright guys, we are fully retracted. I figured I'd come in and let you get a visual of that before I take these C-clamps off. As you can see, we went in even. Both of them are about exactly the same positioning, so looks really good. Should be good to go. You can just literally pull these off and should come right off. Back it off here, another turn on this side here. There we go. As you can see, the pistons are about in the same position. This one might be a hair, like a millimeter more, but you know, overall they look really good, about the same position, and that's all we needed to clear the new pads. So we're fully retracted on our caliper. That's how you can improvise if the correct tool breaks or you don't have the correct tool. But like I said, that was the correct tool to ratcheting pad separator I showed you, but you could also use the dual C-clamp method. Whatever works for you, whatever you prefer, whatever you want to do, totally up to you. But there are some options for you. Let's go ahead and get this rotor off now. All right guys, pistons retracted on the caliper. Just got it tucked away up there nice and safely. Now we have to get our rotor off now. It's more than likely going to be rust welded on there. If you're lucky, it might be, you know, free. It'll wiggle right off and you can pull it off. So if that's the case, just go ahead and pull it off. In our case, ours is rust welded, so what we need to do is get it off. Now if you want to save the rotors, like if you're doing a wheel bearing or something like that, you can use a rubber mallet, hit around the body just like that and it'll break it free. So that's how I got it off. But you could use a metal hammer if you don't have a rubber mallet. You could hit in here to not hit the face, or if you don't care about the old rotor, you're just going to junk it like we're going to do, you could take a metal hammer, you know, hit wherever it's going to free it up. But it just needs a few solid whacks, and that thing will, you know, break free the rust, and then you can easily slide the rotor right off, revealing the hub. And we're completely disassembled now. Now we can go ahead and get into the reassembly. Alright guys, we are fully disassembled, so we're going to go ahead and get into putting everything back together with our new parts. So I have a new rotor here. Now most new rotors come with a grease coating on them, like especially if you buy them from AutoZone or Advanced, they'll have a grease coating on there to help protect them on the shelf from rusting and things of that nature. So this is a power stop rotor. I got power stop rotors and pads. That's what we're putting back on. So this is a power stop rotor. We're gonna go ahead, I already wiped it down. We're gonna go ahead and get this thing on. So you just wanna go ahead, line this bad boy up here with the studs. As you can see, we got her lined up. And what I would suggest to do is take a lug nut, put it on the bottom, and we are going to lock that lug nut in to help prevent this from flexing and keep it stable while we're putting everything back together. So it's got the 21 mil here on the impact. Just going to get it snug. That's all we need. So we have the new rotor on here. Got a lug nut on, holding it in place for stability and to ensure that it doesn't flex on us. So we're good on that. We can go ahead and get our caliper bracket now and put that back on. All right, guys, so I have our caliper bracket here. Just going to slide it right back over the rotor. That thing looks extra rusty now. It's got a fresh rotor on there, but it is what it is. So I got our 19 mil here. I'm just starting it off by hand with my fingers, so we got that to hold. So that one is in. I'm going to go ahead and grab the bottom one now. So I have the bottom bolt. Get that lined up there and get that one started as well. And what I'm going to do is just take the 19 mil here on an impact, snug those in, and then we're going to torque them to spec. So see, I'm just trying to get it to grab so I get a click. You can use whatever you want. Wrench, ratcheting wrench, socket wrench, impact, whatever works, but get it nice and snug, finger tight. And now we're going to go ahead and torque those to spec. All right, so we're going to go ahead and torque our 19 millimeter caliper bracket bolts, and the torque spec for those 19 millimeters is 136 foot-pounds. Okay, 136 foot-pounds. So I have my torque wrench here locked in, 136 foot-pounds. And this is another reason why I suggest to turn the wheel, because it gives you access here for big breaker bars, for big torque wrenches, whatever tool you might be utilizing. And it makes it a lot easier to sneak in here with these tools and get the job done. So there we go, locked in, 136 on that top one. We're just going to get the bottom one to 136, and then we'll be good to go. There we go, guys, both of our caliper bracket bolts now locked into 136 foot-pound. All right, guys, so we have both of our caliper bracket bolts now torqued. Now, one thing you want to do before you put this back together is make sure that your caliper slide pins have play. So as you can see, this is moving very nicely and free. This bottom one's probably going to be a little bit stiffer because it's got that rubber boot on it. So on the bottom caliper slide pin, it's going to have a rubber grommet on the bolt itself. Most brakes are set up this way, but it might be a little bit tighter on the bottom. But this one's moving still pretty freely, which is good. So we don't have to grease these. These are fine. Exactly the movement that you want. If by any chance they're frozen or you have minimal play or movement in them, you can use an impact or a ratchet and, you know, socket wrench and back them out. And you can use something like this. This is brake disc caliper lube. Now this is just something that you can put on the pins. It'll help lube them up. It just re-greases them, and you know, it would give them that play again that they need in order to be free and be functional to the best of their ability. So ours are good. We're good as far as that goes. Now in my case, my hardware fell out, so I'm gonna put the hardware back in. I'm just gonna reuse the old hardware. I do have new hardware, but from most of the experience I've had, you know, I've done a ton of brakes in my life, and they all have usually the new caliper hardware is always a little bit off or doesn't fit as good as the OEM. So as long as there's no damage to the OEM hardware, I tend to reuse it. It usually fits the best. And in fact, in my case, I did try to use the new hardware on the other side, and it did not fit like these at all. It just popped out every time I popped it in. So I like reusing the OEM hardware. Personal preference thing. If you want to put the new ones on, go for it, but we're reusing the old ones and we got them back popped in. So now what we have to do is put our new pads in. All right, guys, so I got our new power stop pad here. Now what I'm going to do before we actually put these on is put a little bit of brake lubricant on the contact points where it's going to be touching the metal. So as you can see, I got a little bit here on my finger. Just want a little bit. You don't have to go crazy. A lot of brake kits actually come with this. Like, this is with the power stop kit. It is, as you can see, the brake component lubricant. So we got that on. This will be the front pad. So go ahead and sneak this in here. So you just want to kind of drop it in the bottom, let that clip push in. And with the first pad, you might have to hold that hardware in place, but it should snap right in relatively easy, just like that. We got it popped right in. And on these pads in particular, it had one brake wear sensor, which is this. So this will hit the rotor when these pads get to a bad level, and it'll start making noise. That's how you know to change them. This particular kit just had it on the one side, which is this side. So this would go in the rear, of course, as you can see. So we're just going to put a little bit of lubricant on this as well on both sides. press it in, and then we have our pads in. Alright guys, got this lubricant on it, same deal as the front pad. Just press it into the bottom, and then just kind of want to hold your hardware up top, press it in, and it should find its way right in there. All right, so we got both of our pads in. Now if you remember, when we disassembled this, it only had one clamp here, so I confirmed this, you know, just wasn't on here. So whoever did these brakes last either lost it or, you know, forgot to put it on. But you definitely don't want to forget to put these on. Now one thing with these new ones, which is really going to stink, is they're going to pretty much fling the pads out. So let me see here, try to bend this in a little bit, but typically, oh, I got it. It's not too bad. Sometimes there's so much tension on these, they'll almost push the pads out of their positioning. You know, this is kind of a common thing with different makes and models of vehicles. This is, you know, becoming more regular on vehicles that have these little, you know, retainer clamps. You can see it's kind of moving a hair, but not much. But you can see we got two new retainer clamps on there. Make sure you don't forget those. They are part of the braking setup. They are on their factory, so we're of course going to put them back exactly how it was. And there we go, we got two new ones in there. So now the next step is grabbing our caliper. So as you know, we already retracted our pistons here. Now one thing I'm going to do before we slide this over our new pads is the brake pad lubricant that I was putting on the ends of the pads, we're also going to put on the contact points of the caliper. So you can see I have a little bit on my finger, put some here, here, and here. And then we're also going to put it on the edges of the piston here. Just a nice smear on, you know, just for a nice contact point on the brake pads. But not a bad thing to practice, and there's nothing wrong with putting that on there. I always do it on any brake job I do. So we have that all greased up. Go ahead and get your caliper now. Make sure your brake hose isn't tangled up, so make sure that's good, because you could potentially tangle it up moving it around. Now if you're having problems with these retainer clamps, what you can do is hold this in place while you're pushing it over, and then that way you can get it over the pads and keep those shims in place. But we're good. Like I said, they weren't enough tension on those to make them fly out. So I got my 14s here. We're gonna go ahead and get these manually started by hand. So got the top one going. I'll go ahead and get this bottom one here into the shim. Okay, got that one going. So I'm gonna get both of these finger tight, and then we're gonna torque both of these 14mm caliper bolts to spec. All right, so we have both of our 14 mils now locked in finger tight, and we're gonna go ahead and torque these to spec. Now the torque spec for these brake caliper bolts, 14 mils, are 20 foot-pounds. Okay, so 20 foot-pounds is a torque spec. Just have a smaller torque wrench here locked in, 20 foot-pounds. Go ahead and get these bad boys locked in here. Not a lot at all, so it's just almost like a nice snug fit, nothing crazy. That top one, we're on the bottom one here, and there we go. 20 foot-pounds, guys. So everything is now torqued to spec. Our brakes are fully reassembled here in the front, all brand new pads, new rotors. So this is all good for the front. I'm gonna go ahead and get the wheel back on. Let's get on to the rear. All right, guys, we are on to the rear now. Same thing, jack stands, jack all locked in on our jack points. So go ahead and remove our rear wheel. Same thing, 21 mil. So 21 mil on the impact. Go ahead and get all 6 of these right out. All right, guys, wheel is off. So we're gonna go ahead and get our caliper bolts out. They are a 14 mil, same as the front. So I have a 14 mil here on a socket wrench. I'm just gonna go ahead, make a homemade impact. There we go, we got that one broken free. Do the same thing here for this bottom one, if I can get on it. Yep, there we go, guys, both 14 mils broken free. So we're gonna go ahead and back these off, and then we'll slide our caliper off. All right, both 14s out. Should be able to go ahead and rock off and slide the caliper off. Got a lot of places you can put this safely here, so I'm just going to drop it right here in that control arm. It's going absolutely nowhere. So we got that off. So now you can go ahead and get your pads out. So you should be able to pop them right out. These weren't quite as bad as the front, but got the pads out. Now, of course, we're going to go ahead and get our bracket out now that the pads are out. So these are 17 mils. on the bracket. So same deal as I did with the caliper bolts, we're doing with the caliper bracket bolts. So 17 mil socket wrench. These things are gonna fight me a bit. They're tight on the other side too. All right, take two, guys. So I got the other side out with a 3/8 drive. Unfortunately, these 17 mils on this bracket are a little tighter than the other side. So I'm really going to show you how to make a homemade impact here. So I got a 17 mil here on my socket wrench, and what you could do, if you got a nice little metal mallet, I knocked it off, but it did break it loose. So I'll give a couple more hits and we should be free. Yep, there you go. So as you can see, that's how you make a homemade impact, guys. So we're just gonna go ahead and get both of these 17 mils out and we'll get the bracket off. All right, guys, same deal here as the front. So you wanna make sure that you take the top bolt out last. You wanna hold the bracket as you back it out, because it is free once these two bolts are out and it will fall and hit the ground. So to avoid that, just hold it, back it out by hand, finger thread the bolt out, and then bang, bracket out, and we're left with our rotor. All right, guys, just the rotor left. Same deal as the front. This is rust welded to the hub, so it's going to need some persuasion. Like I said, if you're lucky, it will be loose and you can slide it right off. I'm going to have to hit this with a rubber mallet, so let me get the rubber mallet out and we'll get this thing off. There it is. There we go. Alright, so as you can see, we rubber malleted our old rotor off. So here's the old rotor, here's a new one. One thing to note on the old rotor, it does have a rubber grommet here. You can take a flathead, or like I have is a small pry bar, pop it out, and then you just press it into the new one with your thumb. It might take a little bit of persuasion, but yeah, this one's gonna fight me, of course, because we're on camera, but there we go. Instead of pushing it in a little bit with the pry bar. So there we go. Go ahead and get that pressed up. And there we go, guys. Rotor is prepped, ready to go. Make sure you wipe it down like I said. And we're gonna go ahead and get this thing installed. All right, guys, so new rotor here. Go ahead and slide it on over. Your wheel studs. Make sure it's nice and tight, even. All right, we're gonna go ahead and put a lug nut on to make sure it's nice and stable for us to work, and it keeps it from flexing or moving on us. So just gonna snug that in with the impact. There we go, nice and tight. We're good to go. So now we can go ahead and get into the reassembly. All right, guys, we got our bracket here, so I'm gonna go ahead and slide that right back over our rotor. All right, should fall right into place. And we'll go ahead and start our 17 mil off here on the top. See if I can find the hoe. There we go. All right, so that one's going in. Let's go ahead and get this bottom one started, and then we're going to snug these in finger tight and then torque them to spec. All right, guys, so we have both of our 17 mils here finger tight. Now we're going to go ahead and torque them to spec. So the torque spec on these 17 mil caliper bracket bolts is 76 foot-pounds. All right, 76 foot-pounds. So we're going to go ahead and lock these into 76 foot-pounds. All right, top one's locked in. We'll go ahead and get this bottom one. All right, there we go, guys. Both 17 mil caliper bracket bolts now locked in to 76 foot-pounds. All right, guys, we got our caliper bracket torqued to spec. So now we're going to go ahead and get our new pads in. I'm going to do the same thing as the front. I'm going to take a little bit of brake component lubricant. I'm going to put it on the contact points where it makes contact with the hardware. All right, don't need a lot, just a little bit. Spread it out over those spots, and then literally just going to take it, press it into the bottom, and press this thing in. And there we go. First one is in on the front. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing for the back and get that one pressed in as well. All right, guys, got the rear pad, some lubricant on it. Make sure the one with the wear sensor goes in the rear, just as we did on the front. And there we go. Both of those snapped into place, good to go. And now we can go ahead and get our caliper over our new pads. All right guys, we got our pads in. Now it's time to get the caliper over the pads. Before we do that, we're gonna go ahead and retract this. Probably should have done this before I put all this new stuff on there, but it's okay. But I got the old rear pad, same thing that we did in the front. I'm just gonna put it into the caliper itself. And we're gonna take our 6-inch C-clamp and go ahead and lock this in over it. All right, and just get it as centered as possible, as clean as possible. All right, so I'm just leaning up against the caliper bracket, and let's go ahead and start getting this thing twisted in. All right, you can see she's moving. 6-inch C-clamp, that's all it is. Sometimes rear calipers on vehicles can be very, very hard to retract, and sometimes almost frozen. If you have a frozen rear caliper, what you can do is lightly take a torch to it, propane torch, small torch, don't let it hit anything rubber. Just move it around the bottom or the belly of the caliper and just move it back and forth slowly, let it warm up, and then try retracting from there if you're having problems getting it retracted. But I've done that numerous times, and I've saved a ton of calipers by doing that, and it saves yourself the headache from replacing the caliper as well. So it's all retracted, guys. It should be more than enough. Let's take that off. We'll go ahead and slide it over our new pads. Ooh, a little bit of dirt in there. Let's go ahead and slide over our new pads. Yep, perfect fit. All right, so we got that retracted. What I'm going to do now is just put a little bit of brake lubricant on the contact points of the caliper as well. So got our brake component lubricant here. Going to put a little bit on this inner part here, a little bit on the inner part here, and then all around the caliper piston here. Okay, so there we go, all lubed up, ready for install. So go ahead and take your caliper, make sure the brake hose is not twisted, make sure it's nice and straight. Like I said in the front, sometimes if you move the caliper around a lot, it can get twisted, so make sure it's going on correctly and not obstructed. Let's go ahead and push this over our slide pins. Make sure you check the slide pins for play too. Do that real quick, show you guys. I already checked them, but same as the front, make sure you check them. And if you need to put some lube on them, obviously lube those up. They should move very easily and free. So our shims are good, everything is good. Caliper retracted over the new pads. Got our 14 mil here. Let's go ahead and get that started on the top, lock that in. Go ahead and get that bottom one lined up. We're gonna start that 14 on the bottom, and we're gonna get both of our caliper mounting bolts here, 14 mils, finger tight, and then we're gonna torque them to spec. All right guys, we got both of our caliper mounting 14 mils, finger tight, and now we're gonna go ahead and torque them to spec. Now the torque spec for these 14 millimeters is 20 foot-pounds. So it's the same thing as the front, 20 foot-pounds. I got 20 foot-pounds here locked in on my torque wrench. Let's go ahead and get these torqued in, locked in. Shouldn't be a lot at all. There we go, top one locked in. Let's get that bottom. Yep, there we go, guys. So both 14 mils now torqued to 20 foot-pounds, and we have the entire rear braking setup fully done now. So everything is reassembled, both front and rear are completely done. You can always give it a spin if you would like, to make sure you have no sounds, make sure everything looks good, nothing's touching before you put everything back together. So I hope this helped with doing the front and rear brake pads on your 3rd gen Nissan Pathfinder. Make sure you stay tuned, because you never know when I might be wrenching on this thing again. And until next time, guys.